we are looking at a massive generation who has had more than any generation in the history before them, and they can't find a reason to live. Stop fighting the seasons that you have no control over of anything other than the recognition that you and I are in control. Chapter 3 is about time. But now we need to take this, it's not just a beautiful poem about time. There are some great observations. We could spend a lot of time going through this first 8 verses and discuss the sovereign proportion of time. There's a great deal to be learned from understanding that, and I believe we will make that application, but we won't walk through each one tonight. I hope that when we finish that you'll kind of have an idea, a big picture idea of what this is about, and you can read it and interpret it yourself. So as we think about time, we put it in the context of the book of Ecclesiastes. And remember what Solomon is telling us in Ecclesiastes. He is living life under the sun. So we're considering what it means to live the life in a fallen world. He's not saying that God is not there. He is taking the perspective of fallen man and the futility that the fall brought into the world. When Adam sinned in the garden and man fell out of fellowship with God, God cursed the earth. Now work becomes labor. Women give birth through pain. The world begins to die. As he said, the day in which you eat thereof, you shall die. And of course, they didn't drop dead, but they did die spiritually immediately. They began to die physically. The whole planet began to die. The whole creation began to die immediately. Began to die. And so we're under this curse. We're living life under the sun down here. And I said before how one guy said it this way. He flipped it around and said it's life above ground. But it's between, if you could think about it in this ancient way, it's between heaven and the grave, there is this life. And this life is filled with war and with famine and with difficulty and trial and error and disappointment and sin and wrong and injustice and famine and poverty and all of these things. And the temptation would be to either blame God or give up on God altogether. Solomon asks this question, in what way can fallen men find any joy in a fallen world? If we're going to get up every day and do the same things over and over again. You've heard me say it before. It's not mine. I got it from Dr. Harold Wilmington. He said that the man says, I dig a ditch to get the strength, to get the money to buy the food, to get the strength to dig a ditch. So and life can feel that way. It can feel just futile, repetitive, circular. Last time we kind of saw that circular idea. You just keep doing the same things over and over. This time we're going to see more of what we call the pendulum. Life just sort of does this. He says, what has been has already happened, and what's going to happen has already been. So you see, this is the way the world feels, and in many ways is. So in that, how does man find joy? How does he find hope? Well, Solomon goes on this journey, this experiment, And he experiments, as we looked last week. If you missed that one, check it out. And he goes through the different things that mankind looks to for joy. Finds them all empty. But he's not through with his experiment or his meditation. Now he's going to continue to think about this problem of time. As fallen people, we want more of it, don't we? But at the same time, we want rid of it. How many times have we told children, don't wish your life away because they're 12 or 13, especially in that pre and teen years. I want to be 20. I want to be 21, like that means anything. Or, or a young man a lot of times. I want to be 30, so I can be considered a man, these kinds of things. Well, when we hit that, we realize there was nothing about that number that changed anything. But what we did, though, is we rushed through valuable time, didn't we, to get to what we thought was going to give us something. And that's chasing a myth, he says last week, it's grasping for the wind. And so he's going to deal with this head on, time. So the first thing that we see as we break down in the verses that you know so well, verses 1 through 8, is he's not just being pretty about time. He wants us to understand something, and that is that we need to stop fighting time. Stop fighting time. I tell you, a book that it's not a profound book, and basically this is only one chapter of the book, but it was the title of the book, and it was written by Warren Wiersbe, and it's called God is Not in a Hurry. I don't know if you've ever seen that book, but it came to the house one time, and I was at a particular place in my life where I needed that. I read the whole book, but the whole book wasn't about that. They were random topics, and that was only one chapter. But it was lying on the coffee table, and I'm sitting there kind of stewing over things in my life and worrying and so forth. And I looked down, and there's that book, and it said, God is not in a hurry. And I thought, well, I am. I'm in a hurry. And apparently I'm not. I should not be. And so I picked that book up, and I felt like I learned a few things from Dr. Wiersbe that helped me begin to put the brakes in and see life a little differently. That's what Solomon is doing here with this beautiful poem. He's telling us there's a time to be born. There's a time to die. There's a time to plant. There's a time to pluck up what is planted. And you say, well, what does he mean by that? Of course, there's a fitting time. This is the way we normally interpret it. And we've got a balancing act here, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the way we normally interpret that is there's a fitting time to do this, and there's a fitting time to do that. And that's true. There's a time to plant, and there's a time to pluck up that which is planted. Don't put your sapling tomato plants out in December, So, okay, that's true. But if we really, and I think that is something that Solomon is telling us, there's a time for things, okay? So if we're 14, it's not time to be married. If you're, I'm going to be really unpopular here. If you're 11, 12, 13, it's not time to date. I know that sounds old, but who cares? Right is right and wrong is right. Wrong is wrong. Right is timeless. It's not a matter of what age we live in. It's a matter of development. A 13-year-old is not emotionally developed to the place where they are ready to take on the emotions and so forth of the opposite sex. And of course, the other is sin anyway. So, but what Solomon is really getting at and driving us to, he says down in the lower part here, what gain has the worker from his toil, verse 9? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So, in my opinion, that verse is what we lay over the first 8 verses and give us an interpretation. And that is, God has set time. God is sovereign. And he literally says that. God will make all things beautiful. Can I say it this way? When he's ready. When it's time. And he's done this, he says, because he wants us to fear him. And he wants us to humble ourselves before him. And one way he does that is by not telling us everything he's doing. That's what he says. But he has given us this, eternity in our hearts. What does that mean? A sense, here's what it means. A sense that there is more to everything than time. There is more to life than time. There's a God, the true God, who is outside of time. He's eternal. So rather than spending your life, expending your life, obsessing over trying to control this, look above that to the one who holds all seasons and all times in his hands. God hasn't left us. Yes, he hasn't told us what he's doing, but he has told us who he is. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so I don't want to go any farther than that. But this is what we need to understand. Stop fighting time. We need to do that, don't we? We need to do that. I had a job. I worked at in the master control at a TV station one time years ago. I was right out of high school. If you know anything about that kind of thing, everything's timed to the second. Okay, so this program ends at 23:05. At 23:06, this commercial runs. It runs 15 seconds. Another commercial, so everything's to the second. If you're not careful, you can begin to try to run your life like that. I knew a guy in college that, you're in college, especially seminary, you're busy. He's a married student, child, working full-time student, volunteering in the church. He's got a few things to do. Amen. So, and then of course you got to sleep, and eat. So I get it. I understand. But he was so regimented that he and I would be having coffee, studying together or something. He's like, okay, I'm going to have to go. I've scheduled 45 minutes with my wife, and then I need to go do this and that. And I'm like, I hope you didn't tell your wife you scheduled 45 minutes with her. That would be terrible, but I believe he did. So, yeah, that would be awful, wouldn't it? There is a little bit of fluidity, or there must be. There must be. And not because of anything other than the recognition that you and I are in control. Many times, let's just put it this way. I can remember one time I was scheduled to preach at a church, and I was running late. I was working really hard trying to finalize the message during the hour or 2 hours before the service. And so, I wasn't coming up with the message. I was polishing it, this kind of thing. So it wasn't like the end of the world, but, it's important time, prayer and so forth. So, and I get a knock, and this fellow comes in and says, can I talk to you? And I'm like, yeah. you know. And, you know, he was having issues at home, serious problems. And, you know, I thought, God sent this man in here. He needs this time. So you at that point, you say, yes, Lord, this is more important than my finishing touches on my sermon. You know, and I'll tell you where I learned that from the book Spiritual Leadership by Oswald Sanders. And he gives a little bit of an explanation there of when Jesus is walking through the crowd and he's on his way to something. It's very important. And he's on his way. And he's got all these people around him, and the woman reaches and grabs the hem of his garment. And she's healed. Remember that? And he stopped. And he said, who touched me? And his disciples says, Lord, there's people all around you. You're being thronged. How could you ask that who touched you? But Jesus found this woman and dealt with her there. And that was the point that Sanders made, was when you're in spiritual leadership, you need to be in touch with the Lord, because you could be on an important mission, but God's got a few stops between here and there that he wants you to make. So time. Don't fight it. You know, try to live where you are. You know, kids want to be older. How many of us would love to be a kid again? What took you so long to raise your hands? Raise your hand. Right? I mean, I like being an adult. You know, I don't have the Peter Pan syndrome, you know. But you know, those were good times. There were a lot of good things that we enjoyed when we were children, and we'd love to go back and experience that again. Yeah, amen to that. Yeah, so there's a time, and God's in charge of that time. We're not, I say, the brutal march of time, but what we're going to find out is because it's only brutal if you fight it. It's only brutal if you don't have God as sovereign and king over it. When God's king over it, it's not brutal anymore. Number 2, find joy in our toil. Find joy in our toil. You say, well, preacher, how in the world do you find joy in toil? No, I think it's possible, and that's what he's saying here in verses 9 through 13. What gain has the worker from his toil? Now, he asks the question, but he does answer it. I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Now, remember last week he had the same statement. But there it was a little more negative. He says, I see the business that God has given man to do. And in that context, last week we saw that it was kind of a negative, you know, that it's a hard business that man has to live in this world. Some people are born with handicaps or born into terrible homes, or, you know, and so forth. There's the list of cares and troubles, trials and difficulties that beset us are endless. Amen? And that's what Solomon is saying. He says, I've seen it. I've seen what God has brought man into as a result of the fall, obviously. So we did it to ourselves in a very real sense. Far from the pie in the sky, you know, people are, Christianity is for the weak-minded and those that can't cope and so forth. No. We don't need a drug. We don't need alcohol. We don't need any of the things that Solomon pointed out last time. And yet we're looking at the ugliness of fallenness right in the face. And we're laughing at it. We're saying, I can have joy in that anyway. How can a woman like Johnny Erickson Tata always have a smile, writing wonderful, godly books? Elizabeth Elliot, her husband, murdered. And yet she continues her whole life writing and teaching and, and encouraging people to trust God. How's that possible? Right here. It is possible. He has made everything beautiful in its time. You see, when God is at the helm of this, then we realize, yes, there's pain now. But guess what? He told us, didn't he, in the book of Revelation, and He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. Most of the world's population will fight back the tears their whole life here, and then never have them wiped away in eternity. You and I can be forgiven here, blessed by God here. We might suffer trials and tribulations, and maybe even persecution. But when it's all said and done, the tears will be wiped away. And heaven and earth will be made new. And we will enter into, you remember what Jesus said? Enter into the joy of your Lord. You see what's waiting for us? He has put eternity in their heart, yet so that he cannot, verse 11, so that he, man, cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. God gives us a lot of knowledge, but He's not going to give it all. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is a gift from God. You see? It's brutal if you don't see it as a gift from God. Life is a gift. That's what He's saying. He's not saying eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's hedonism. Live for now. That's YOLO. You only live once. That's live it up, because after you die like a dog. No, that's not what He's saying. He's saying, listen, you're in a fallen world. And yes, you've got difficult things to deal with. But enjoy the life that God has given you. Stop fighting the seasons that you have no control over. We didn't want to lose our parents, did we? Our child? A friend? We didn't want that terrible thing to happen to us, did we? But we also are so happy that these good things happened to us that we had nothing to do with, and we were surprised that it happened in our lives. Things we couldn't predict. Things that oftentimes we could have never foreseen. I spent a decade as a family pastor. Never saw that coming. And the whole time I was there, I told Lori, I said, it's not that I don't have any of these gifts. It's not that I don't appreciate, I love what I'm doing. I love this church. But I feel like I'm working with my left hand. And I'm right-handed, by the way. You see, why? Because it's like God took me into a place and used my secondary gifts, not my primary gifts. And that was very hard. Very hard. But I grew immensely from it. And I would not trade that decade for anything in the world. But the whole time, I thought, my own mentor said, don't ever be an associate pastor. Don't take any positions like that. You're a senior pastor. Don't do anything else. That's what he said. So I'm quoting that back to God. I'm like, you remember what Dr. Curalo said, But see, he's not God. God said, no, I got a plan for you. You're going to spend 10 years here, learn some things, and enjoy some things, and suffer through a few things that I have for you. We have to be not fighting it, but embrace the toil of our life, whatever that might be. We all got to work. We all got problems to deal with and so forth. But Solomon says in verse 13, this, he says, I perceive this is a gift to man from God. We are looking at a massive generation who has had more than any generation in the history before them, and they can't find a reason to live. Suicide, depression, these things are at a historic high. Why? Because these things don't satisfy. The more there is to pursue, the more we pursue, and the farther we get away from our Creator, who is the source of all our joy. Lastly, and in conclusion, we fear God and trust the future to Him. Fear God and trust the future to Him. Now, I originally put on here, leave the future to Him. And what I meant by that was stop fighting it. Stop trying to control it. You know, you can do two different things. You know, you can fight it or you can try to control it. And both of those are not spiritually healthy, all right? But at the end of the day, I thought, leave it to God, it's not right. It's as if God will take care of that. That might be close to what we would call fatalism. In other words, God's sovereign, nothing we can do about it. Just let Him do it. We'll go over here and we'll live our life. That is not what Solomon is saying. I made sure I changed that word to a relational word. Trust Him. Trust Him. I think that's better suited to what Solomon is saying. Look in verse 14 and 15. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. God has done it so that people fear Him, fear before Him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. And when you put that idea with verses 9 through 13, I think what we get here is Solomon is saying, God is sovereign. He has created these things in His time. He understands them. He knows the whole plan. You and I don't. Trust Him. Trust Him. You walk with Him. And see your life as a gift. Enjoy your toil, your difficulties and problems, but realize this life is a gift. It might be short, but at the same time, we got to love. We got to be loved. We got to serve and do something for our Lord. There's so many things that are a gift. The fact that we were created means that, and maybe this is what Solomon means in one sense. We were created. We will live forever. So if we hadn't been created, eternity wouldn't be an option, would it? But it is now because we were created. But now we have to decide where we're going to spend that eternity. With God or under the wrath of God. So we need to understand that. So we're not talking about fatalism. We're talking about faith. Faith. Trusting that God is in control of these things. Now, let me do something really quickly before we leave. Look at this watch. Look at that. Wow. Whew. What a blessing. I'd have been over here, I'd have been here like 8 o'clock. That's why we were getting out late. It wasn't me. It was Billy's like, you better stop it. So anyway, last time, or the first chapter, we talked about how if God is not in control and we don't see and live life under the sun, under the fear or in the fear of God and believing Him, then life can feel like this useless circle, just cyclical. It just, as I said before, you dig the ditch to get the money to buy the food, to get the strength to dig the ditch. Circular. Today, we're seeing, Solomon says what's been has already, has going to happen again. And so he's not talking about reincarnation. He's not talking about any of this Mormon type of their misinterpretation of recapitulation or any of that. All he's saying is that as the pendulum, the pendulum swings from side to side, that life is like that. Things, we go to war, then we have peace, and we do this, and then we do that, and then it happens again, and then it happens again, and this kind of thing. It can seem monotonous. It can seem useless or pointless. Can I say it another way? Purposeless meaning of life. What's the point? Well, the point is what Solomon says, and honestly, in verses 9 through 13. We should live and enjoy this life and be ready for the next one. So I would, if we're going to give us another one here, I'd say maybe something like this is the faith view. We're living life, but it's always with an upward. We're under the sun, but and all is vanity. It's grasping for the wind. It's circular. It's pendulum. You're not going to do anything that hadn't already been done. There's nothing novel. That's humbling, isn't it? It's meant to be humbling. But here's the good thing: you can live your life under the sun. And experience joy. Life is not worthless. It's not meaningless. It's an investment. It's a gift.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our latest video. Go ahead and click that little thumb so you can like that video, as well as on the bottom right hand corner, click that little bell to subscribe and receive notifications. Thank you again so much for tuning in, supporting our video ministry here at Coggins Church.